Welcome to Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. I just drove to the lower end of that ditch that Carson and I cleaned out back in February. We took a break from our TSI and came over on this side of the valley and cleaned out this ditch to give us easy access in and out of this ridge behind us. This is one of the spots where the buck that we were hunting last season, we had nicknamed him the Jordan buck. He was living on this ridge behind me a fair amount of the time. We don't know for sure, where he was all the time because we just didn't have cameras everywhere, but at least part of the time he was up here. And we didn't have a good way to get in there to hunt him, so we didn't go in there. We didn't prepare well enough in advance to kind of have that nailed down. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm not going to hang my tree stands today. There's too much risk in that. Two things can really go wrong when you do that. One is you might get in the wrong spot because you can't see very well through the cover. You might be seeing the trees and not the forest, so to speak. You're not seeing the big enough picture of how the deer move. The other problem is if you do any cutting in oak trees at this time of the year, you can kill them. And the problem is oak wilt. And there's a beetle that carries that, and there's a time frame when that beetle is active. And talking with the local forester, he said really about any time after, I think it was April 15th, you should probably not do any cutting, and not before the first hard freeze in the fall. So going in there now, if you're going to hang stands in, let's say, an elm tree or a hackberry tree or something like that, you wouldn't have any problems with that. You could do that just fine. But if you're going to go into an oak, you run a lot of risk if you do any cutting of killing that tree. So I'm just going to carry the stands in. I'm going to set them really close to the spots. I've got 3 of them I'm going to set today, or not set, but stash today. And I'm going to get them as close to the spots where I think we're going to end up as I possibly can. That'll save a lot of carrying and a lot of time and a lot of trouble when fall comes. It's the next best thing to hanging them now, and hopefully will give us a lot better opportunity to be active back on this ridge than if we just waited until the last minute and tried to hang the stand while we were hunting. Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails is brought to you by Redneck Blinds, Code of Silence Apparel, Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail App, Whitetail Institute, Research Equals Results, B3 Archery, Muddy Outdoors Tree Stands, Stealth Cam Trail Cameras, My Outdoor TV, and Hoyt. The spot that I'm going into here, once I get up in there, I'll talk a little bit about the location, and I'll show you the hunt stand overview of it, and I'll also show you the aerial footage that we've filmed over this spot. It's a pretty cool little location up in here. There's a nice funnel, and I think when the fall comes there's going to be a lot of action, and this will be a fun spot if that buck that we were hunting last season is here again this fall. That wasn't too bad. One trip down, one to go. There's a real heavy crossing on this ditch that I've been going up. And it's the lowest heavy crossing on this ditch. So you would think with a north wind coming from in front of me up the ditch, or a northwest, it would funnel down the ditch and take the scent away from this crossing, and then there's a couple more further up. Also, the thermals in the evening, as steep as this is, when it starts to cool down, the air drops. It's heavier when it gets cooler, and it settles into these little smaller valleys and just runs down. It almost follows, well, it does follow the same direction and the same course that the water takes when it runs off. So this is the safest spot. I think that this will be our starting point. I think we set a stand here. There's a few trees around that don't look too bad. In fact, there is one here. I think it's some kind of an elm back here. Yeah, I mean, I could have set a stand in that one because I wouldn't have to worry about killing it by doing any cutting. But this might not be the spot. So we'll, like I said, this will be where I stage the stands. And then as the season gets closer, we might be able to fine tune the strategy here on this spot. But I did notice that a few things had fallen into our ditch since we cut it out. It wasn't terrible, it wasn't impassable, but this is only about 2/3 of the way up. We cut it a lot further thinking that we were going to hunt closer to the head of this ditch. But like I said, this is probably a smarter spot, a little bit safer, lower down. You're not potentially going to have as many deer crossing the ditch on the downwind side if you're hunting this lower part of it, you know, the lowermost crossing. We can always move up if this ends up being too conservative. So that's this spot. I've got 2 more that I need to stage. When we were in here shed hunting, we picked this spot, approximately this spot. Looks a lot different with the foliage on. There's a big long point that comes off that food plot up on the ridge to my right. And I'm sure there's a lot of deer that bed on this point, but there was tons and tons of rut sign. Scrapes all over the place back in here, big rubs. This is the area where the buck that we were hunting last year spent the winter. This is where we found his sheds. We found one about 150 yards behind me. The other one was probably about 150 yards down to my left, down in the valley. So we're gonna set up where I'm gonna set up when the time comes, somewhere on this point. I want to take advantage of all this rut activity that takes place back in this bedding area. It should set up well because we're high enough where our scent should blow off across the valley below and hopefully above the heads of any deer. It should set up for a west and a northwest wind, which are generally ideal for rut hunting. Picking the exact tree, oh boy. I mean, there's any number of options here. I see a big bur oak in front of me. It's got branches about 15 feet up, 18 feet up. That might work. But again, setting stands this time of the year is really an act of futility. You generally are way too exposed when the fall comes, because now you're looking at it and you think, oh, there's cover up there. But then when all the leaves drop, there's nothing, you're skylined, and it just doesn't work very well. So I don't like to hang them when there's this much vegetation, but at least I can stage or stash these stands, kind of like I talked about. You also might be wondering why I drove the four-wheeler clear back in here. I mean, it saves a little wear and tear on the old body. I've learned one thing about scouting. Either you got to be super secretive, where the deer don't know you're there, or you got to make a bunch of noise. That middle ground is where you get into trouble. I would much rather spook them, get them out of there, stop, run a chainsaw, make a bunch of noise, give them plenty of warning that you're coming, and that way they can move on and get out of the area. Deer don't like to be surprised. And if you come sneaking into a spot but you don't get away with it, you leave a lot more of an impact on those deer than you would if you just drove in there with a four-wheeler. That was my mindset. Plus, like I said, it makes carrying these stands back into here a lot easier. I have settled on this big bur oak tree as my starting point. If we come up from below, All we're doing is coming up the valley, coming past the scrape tree, up that valley, hitting the fence, and then climbing to get to this spot. So that should be a lot less impact to get in and out of this location coming from that direction. So I'm going to drop my stuff off here, put those ladders together, and then I've got one more spot around the corner. It's probably about 250 yards, maybe a little bit more away from here. This should also make for a really good rut hunting spot. I better drop a pin, and that way I know I can walk right to it when the time comes to hunt here. This is my third spot. This is another one that I found when I was shed hunting. So there is definitely benefit to shed hunting. I'm not a great shed hunter, but I do uncover some really good stand locations. This one, I would call it a safe spot because there are a few pretty heavy trails running along this ridge top. And this one is the most downwind, assuming a west or a northwest wind, of all of the trails that are running along this side. So it's a good starting point. I think that's generally good advice. When you go into a spot that you're not very well experienced in, pick a conservative starting point, because you can watch, you can see what the deer do, and you can see how well your entry and exit route works. You can kind of get a feel for the best way to hunt it without diving right in and messing it up. We won't mess this up. It's not a real big oak tree that I've picked, but it's got a nice branch right at stand height that will help us to stay a little bit hidden. It's right, 5 yards off a decent trail, but about 10 or 15 yards below down the hill from a really, really heavy trail. I'm excited about this spot. It's not a long ways away from the other one, like I said, 250 yards probably, but it's got a lot of potential. You can see quite a bit. There's a lot of visibility here, which is really good. Obviously, when the leaves fall off, it's going to be even more, but that helps you to learn. Going into spots where you don't have a lot of experience, you need to have that benefit of seeing what the deer are doing. Plus, you can call to them. If you can see them, you got a pretty good chance, or at least a decent chance of calling them in. So I need to get the stands on the ground and the hawk climbing stick. I'm excited about putting those to work. They seem like a really nice way to get up, up and down a tree. Got my third spot set up. I'm excited about all three of these spots. They should be really good additions to the rotation. I've owned this farm now, parts of it for 3 seasons, parts of it for 2. This is the first time that I've really had the opportunity to get deeper into the timber. I'm so cautious about my impact during the season. I hate going in and bumping deer out of the places that they feel safe. So doing it now really helps me out a lot. I can be more in sync with where I need to be, which is in some of these travel routes between bedding areas back in the cover. Yeah, like I said, this should be a lot more interesting season spent deeper in the timber. Well, I appreciate you joining me. We'll see you right back here again soon for the next episode of Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. And remember to always dream big.